Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Punch Kick Choke Chat. My name is Sean Benson. I'm one of your hosts, and we have the absolute pleasure tonight of having Sensei Paul Dupre with us. We're going to get into a very storied Canadian history with him. If you've looked at our site, you can see everything he's done, but we want to hear it from him. So, as always, I'm going to start with a bit of a question. So, Sensei Dupre, we're going to talk all about, your karate and that through line, but I actually want to start, given that you've studied Tai Chi, Kung Fu, water boxing, and I'd like to know how you see those, or if you see those, as the roots that in Okinawa did lead to what we know as karate.
Absolutely. First of all, yeah, the when you know the close relationship that Okinawa had with China and the actual 22 families that started living in a special village that was created for them in Okinawa, you realize that number one, Japan didn't do a lot of direct trade with China. They would use Okinawa as their intermediary because they didn't want to appear like the governments approved each other or whatever. So they used Okinawa as sort of the intermediary to do all the exchanges, and especially because in Japan the heat was a big deal. So of course, one of the things that they traded was the cloth that made their clothing, their uniforms, etc. And that was a very big business. So because of that, some of the people who were actually in the trade were also martial artists because they had to guard the goods, they had to protect the people who were involved in the goods. So of course, martial artists came with those families,
Hmm.
and I think also because we're talking about trade, so a number of Okinawan people also went to China to participate there and learn the martial arts that were originally from China and bring it back to Okinawa. Karate didn't exist in Japan at all until people from Okinawa went to the mainland.
Yeah. And so we're going back to the 14th century with these families in Okinawa, right? So,
Oh, maybe even earlier. Who knows? The records are very few, and the real accounts we really don't know. So it may be even older than that.
and what about in your own physical exploration of the Chinese arts? Do you then go, oh, I can actually see these roots here in terms of what you actually know in your body?
Yes, you can see the roots for sure. Um, my actual introduction to the reason for my going over to the Chinese arts was because one of the major uh, JK instructors at that time, Kanazawa, practiced Tai Chi.
Mm.
And he was very adamant that practicing the Tai Chi aided him develop his karate. So that really sparked a big, like bright bulb over my head to say, oh, interesting. That's an idea.
Hmm.
Let's maybe study that or look at that.
It's interesting you say that because Billy Hines, who we've had on this show, Sensei Hines, he when I interviewed him 25 years ago, he talked all about how he was moving toward Tai Chi as much as the hard Goju. And let me throw that to you, Hanshi Legacy, as someone who does White Crane, which is a Okinawan White Crane, not a Kung Fu, but also your teacher Benny Allen did Chinese martial arts. So where do you go with the roots of Chinese martial arts, and where do you see it physically in our art?
Wow, that's a long story. It depends where you want to start. You can start right back in India, right, and work your way up into China. But as far as we're concerned, I think um, and Hunan, which was probably the closest martial arts temple to Taiwan, and then Okinawa, the um, geez, I forget the woman's name, the one who invented White Crane, right?
Fang
Uh,
Chili.
Fang Chiliang, she's the one who got things started. You can trace all our lineage back to her because the White Crane uh, that she invented became the mother art of all karate after her. And that was the art that was brought. Then when Matsumura went to China as an attaché or on some sort of a job for the king, he started bringing that stuff back, and he changed it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And the original 36 families in Okinawa, Kusanku was one of. That's how our lineage got there. He's standing there looking at the water on a bridge, and then Sakugawa tried to push him in the water. Didn't turn out too good for him. So to make a long story long, he went and told his sensei that he had tried to push Kusanku in the water. He told him to go and train with him if he could, and that's how it all started.
No, I love that. That's a wonderful story, and not long at all. But Hanshi, even when I did that research years ago, I remember chatting with Sensei Kwai Wong, who talked about Benny Allen in the 50s training with the Chinese upstairs on Spadina, partly because you could drink after hours there. And what do you know about that in terms of where our karate blends with Chinese in modern day, like physically?
Well, Benny Allen was a quiet, believe it or not, he was a sort of a quiet, private guy. And he would go to the Chinese restaurants and talk to the owners, and not sure about the laundry places, but I knew that the restaurants, and he worked out with persons in the back rooms and stuff there. And you wonder where he got that soft touch and way he stood. I'm sure they exchanged information and katas at that time, because he hit so hard while being so soft. And that's part of where I gained my love for karate being soft as opposed to being hard. Because as you know, in martial arts, soft is hard and hard is soft.
That's a good point, because one of the things I found when I was teaching was I often had to tell them, because a lot of men, especially, we think we have to be macho, we think we have to tense the muscle. Wrong. You can't get speed if you're tense, right?
Right.
So I'd have to correct them and tell them, no, you have to relax. And they go, what do you mean? Just power? No, that's not power. Power is when you hit the target, not before.
That's right. Yeah.
Sensei Suino, is there anything you want to chip in? I mean, something like judo or Japanese jiu-jitsu doesn't quite have that Chinese underpinning that we're talking about, but what about other influences coming up through that, or is that a very strict Japanese lineage?
Well, I'm not so sure that's true. I
Oh,
think that that much of Japanese martial arts came from other places, most specifically China. There's a lot of old Chinese grappling arts that don't get much publicity, but if you go back, I think you can see what you would probably call Japanese Jiu-Jitsu or Japanese Jiu-Jitsu-like motions in China long before they started calling it that.
Yeah.
yeah, Sensei Dupre, you seem to be really connecting with that idea.
Well, yeah, because I'm familiar with the techniques that they call chinna, which is actually a form of wrestling, uh, but it includes locks and throws. So yes, there's definitely a connection there as well.
I love that. And I just want to say, Hanshi Legacy, what we're talking about here with the broad history in Okinawa is you've got some, hard men who learn a softness from China, perhaps, and then even within our modern time, that's what Benny Allen offered us, which is adding the soft. So it's sort of cool that we have a compressed modern day version of the whole history of martial arts in Okinawa.
Yeah, there were a lot of different martial arts. What I spoke of specifically was karate, but there were a lot of other things going on. Like Kanryo Higashiona was a student of Matsumura, and then his student was Miyagi Chojin. So Higashiona went to China after training with Matsumura's martial art and learned Pakwa and Tai Chi, and came back, and sometime between him and Miyagi Chojin, they invented the hard soft style. So he used Matsumura's hard style. It wasn't really hard. It was fluent, but it hit harder. And Pakwan Tai Chi, and he combined both.
Mm,
That's how he got Goju hard, soft.
Well,
love
that's why I wanted to practice water boxing, is because water boxing is a combination of three: Tai Chi, Bagua, and Xingyi. So you've got the three softer arts that are all part of that. So I thought, if I'm gonna practice something, it's good to have something that has those connections with several of them.
Mm.
But
Um,
I'm sorry, what I like to say there is I totally agree with the softness. The macho guys who thought they hit hard really didn't. They held all the energy in their bodies.
Yes.
But it can be explained by taking a bullet and throwing at somebody. Taking a bullet that's, just a small part of the size of your small finger, putting it in a gun, speeding it up.
Yeah.
That's what really makes everyone equal: ladies, men, small people, big people. If you
Yeah.
learn how to hit properly, that was the equalizer amongst everyone.
Very much so.
Hanshi, this reminds me of the drills we did 2 weeks ago. I was watching a video of Russian style boxing, and the old coaches just had them swing their hips and have their arms loose at the side instead of all tight up here. And even Ali sort of instinctively fought that way with that absolute relaxation and then the power at the end of it.
Sean, it's funny you mentioned Russian boxing. While we were dipping our toes into the idea of Chinese Jiu-Jitsu, there's a Chinese form of wrestling or judo called Sui Chao, and its predecessor was something called Jiao Di. And I don't know much about that, but I do know that there's probably some roots between Sambo, right? And there's a lot of
Yes.
interchange between Russia and China. I mean, this is a historical conversation. We can just keep unpacking, but it's just fascinating. The stuff comes from China. Probably India has gone out to places like Russia, and who knows how long the Western countries, Greece, and those folks were doing things like this, and what influence that had on the whole mix, right?
Well, if I'm not mistaken, one of the things you mentioned just now, Shui Chao, there was a famous uh, teacher of that called, they nicknamed him the Iron Butterfly.
Mhm.
And if you look it up, you'll probably find the whole history of Shui Chao itself. And what's interesting is he was doing this uh, just, I think, around 1920, 1930. He was doing these open challenges and challenging anybody who wanted to come on stage and fight them. And apparently he was never defeated. So it's interesting to see these sort of things and the history and how it developed. That's one of the things I've always found fascinating about the martial arts, is not just practicing, but the history, the learning about where it comes from, how it came about. I mean, I've had a huge interest in all of that for a long time.
Sensei, I think that Iron Butterfly guy was, I don't know, I'm going to massacre his name, but he was named Chang Dongsheng. Uh, a very famous guy. There's actually, as you said, a ton of stuff about him on the internet, and his
Right.
and his history with the Kuomintang, and he was also a Xingyi guy. So now all this stuff comes together.
Yes, yes.
Well, before I go to Sensei Dauphin for a thought, I mean, even in the grappling we do, it's called invisible jujitsu, the gentle art, because if you're stiff, you will get locked up really fast, and if you're soft, your weight doubles. Sensei
Well,
Dauphin, where do you want to go with this?
I I think that the thought I had as everybody was talking is the people who can hit really hard are always soft, and they actually usually have the best focus too. Because if you're a person who hits with a lot of muscle, that's actually you're not focusing your technique. Then you're just guiding your technique to a place instead of throwing it there with focus. They call it throwing a technique, not guiding a technique, and you have to be soft to throw something.
yeah, you have to be relaxed. And I would teach, and sometimes I would tell them, Okay, look at the lady do it. And they go, oh, I'm a man. I said, yeah, but you're doing it wrong. I said, you're trying to make it muscle before you even get to the target. So it's like, no, don't show us your biceps. Just hit the target.
That's it. Like I said, that from day one, he still says, ladies start off in the dojo better with more power
True.
than men because they can relax.
Absolutely true. That's what I've seen. Yeah.
Sensei Suino, you said it. We could talk about this for an hour and a half, and I'd actually like to, but we're not here to talk about just Chinese arts and just soft blends, and we're here to talk about Sensei Paul Dupre. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're joining us on YouTube, either live or later on, hit that subscribe, hit that like. We're so glad you're here with us. Shit talk us in the comments so you can drive traffic for us and we can get that engagement. If you're listening on the podcast, we hope the banana bread you're making tastes wonderful. But if you're here with us on the Zoom call, you're a part of a living history. And, Sensei Dupre said some nice things about the show, which is, this could go down in history, and we hope it does. That's what we're doing here is we're creating a record, and by being on the Zoom call with us, you're part of that record. So there's a chat button at the bottom, and we'd love for you to ask questions of our sensei tonight or of us in the realm of what we're discussing, and that'll get lit up for you if you don't see it currently. And it is always my pleasure to just touch upon the other hosts, Sensei Randy Dauphin, Sensei Nicolas Suino, and Hanshi Gary Legacy. And I talk to Sensei Dauphin every Thursday morning. We have a standing phone call, and I came up with that idea because it was his idea. Most of my karate ideas are his ideas, and he came up with that idea because Sensei Suino and him do it, and Sensei Dauphin either talks to or sees Hanshi Legacy every week. And I just want to say, the glue that creates, because it's not just about the martial arts and it's not just about the punching, it's about the person and it's about the personal. And Sensei Dauphin said something today just about the fact that whether we're up or down, there's these people who have each other's backs no matter what and aren't going anywhere. And I just want to say how grateful I am for the action of that time we spend making sure we connect, and then also what that goes on to mean. So thanks for that to my teachers, and I want to throw it to you, Sensei Dauphin.
Thanks so much, Sean. So Sensei Dupre started his martial arts journey in 1963. And if you don't know, that's 61 years that he's been involved in martial arts. And as much as this bothers me to say, because it's going to make Sensei Suino happy, he started in Judo and Jujitsu at the Downsview Air Force Base in Toronto. And he started with a person that is a legend in Canadian martial arts, which is Sensei Frank Hatashita. I still am good friends with his nephew, Roman, see him fairly regularly. And he was a student of Hatashita Sensei until 1966, when his family moved to Quebec. He also attended the Japanese Cultural Center. That was founded in 1963, and continued training in Quebec in the 70s under Raymond Damblant and this other little known martial artist, Hiroshi Nakamura. So I say that obviously tongue in cheek. And as well, he kept doing judo, and that was with Nicolas Gill at that time. He studied Aikido, Aiki-Jutsu. Again, we just talked about all the Chinese martial arts that he's trained in. But in his own words, he was amazed with his first view of karate in Toronto. That was at the JCCC, and he knew he wanted to do that. Tsumura, Shito, and Shitoryu became an instructor there at that center. Nisei Karate Club started in 1963, and Sensei real karate journey began in 1973, with, of course, at the YMCA. Another person who claims that their real martial arts journey started at the YMCA. And he continued with both Shitoryu and Shotokan at that time. The various instructors he's had in those arts are like a who's who, right? I can't read them all, but Nakayama, Nishiyama, Kanazawa, Sean, you trained with Nishiyama, so you guys will have some common things there. Sorry, Sensei Dupre, my notes are a little jumbled here. He also did some kendo with a good friend and buddy, which was Richard Goulet, who was a fifth dan in that. 1973 on, he practiced various forms of, as we talked about, Kung Fu, Chinese martial arts, 7-star, praying mantis, Tai Chi. He practiced Tai Chi and Liu Hao Ba Fa, and he still does those today. He's still practicing those arts today. Lots of different weapons. He's done things with katana, sai, nunchaku, bow. He was the former vice president of the JKA Quebec. He competed from 1973 until around 1989. Lucky for me, I started karate in 1989, so he was gone when I had to hit the tournament scene. He was no longer there. I'm happy about that. He's friends with a lot of the people that we're friends with. We see Sensei Dupre at Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. He's friends with Hunchi Burkowski, Hunchi McCarthy, Sensei Maletsky, who's on this call, Hunchi Tarian, Sensei Villanov. He's friends with all of these people. Sensei Legacy. Currently, he's ranked 8th dan in Shotokan, but he holds several black belts in many different styles. Sensei Dupre and I have really only gotten to know each other over the last number of years at Capital Conquest and at the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame. So I don't know him really well, but what I do know about him, I really like. Obviously, he's devoted his entire life to doing martial arts, which is amazing. He's also just a really open, genuine, and warm human being when you're around him. He's been very big supporter of Punch Kick Choke Chat, which all of us really appreciate. And it's just super wonderful to have you on here tonight, Sensei Dupre. It's so nice to be able to learn about you and your history more, which I don't know much about. So Sean, if you're going to take it away, we'll get back to Sensei Dupre.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sensei Dauphin. So Sensei Dupre, we tend to start with a question that excites everybody, and it's the beginning. What was it like for you growing up, and what brought you into your first club?
Yes. Well, it was actually when we moved to Toronto. Now, picture this. Up until that time, I never spoke a word of English. So I was actually a French-speaking little kid going to Toronto. My father being in the armed forces, it wasn't a choice we made. We were told that's where we're going. And I believe that probably in the beginning, say 5 or 6 months, I was having 3 to 5 fights a week because the children thought I was a foreigner because I didn't speak the same language. And so it was a tough period. And my father, having been trained in the army, he was part of the Vendus, the very famous regiment here in Quebec. And so he sort of said at one point when I came home after I fought, I think 3 or 4 guys and my jacket was torn, hey, first question, he says, I hope they're in worse condition than you. And next is like, I think we need to get you some training. What do you think? And I said, oh yeah. So he asked around on the base, the Air Force Base where he was stationed. And so I ended up taking Judo and Jujitsu to defend myself. And at that time, if you looked in a class photo, for example, as a student, all you had to do is look for the smallest kid. That was me at that time. I didn't actually grow a lot until I hit 15. And then the guys who'd be giving me trouble were hiding in the corridors because I put on a lot of weight. I think I grew about 5 or 6 inches over the summer. So I was like, oh my God. And
how old were you when you moved to Toronto?
That was in 1963. And we moved back to Quebec in 1966 in the summer of 1966. Because he didn't want to interrupt myself and my 3 sisters. He didn't want to interrupt our education. So if we moved, they tried to plan it so it was during the summer when there was a break between the schools.
So how did that feel being in those first, I mean, you're this kid getting picked on, you're a military kid, but how did it feel when you started to learn a bit of that stuff? And, did you know then you were going to keep going, or did that come later?
Actually, that probably came later. At first, it was just, well, something just to defend myself.
Mhm.
And I didn't think it was going to be a lifelong pursuit, for sure. But like I said, learning to defend myself, and being the type of kid I was, I asked around in the neighborhood. I said, "Who's the toughest son of a bitch around here, about my age, or maybe a couple of years older?" They, "Oh, that's John Steinberg. Nobody messes with him." So I went and picked a fight with John Steinberg. Now, he knocked me down about 4 or 5 times, but I kept getting back up, and he just said, the hell with it. And we became friends.
I love it. I love it. I wish that happened more these days.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then talk about your move after that and what martial arts that led to.
Like I said, did judo and jujitsu at the Air Force Base. But because of the exposure to that, then finding out that they had the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center in Toronto, and that there was activities there and that sort of thing. So I was interested in that, but didn't actually get to go there until later on, I think in '64. And I had a huge interest in that. But what really lit my eyes and my attention was a demonstration of karate. Because here I was, like I said, the small guy. So in the judo, of course, they loved having me because you're just throwing a sack of potatoes around, right? So I learned I'm great at break falls, okay? Really great, because I had to learn that because they loved throwing me around. I was so light and so small, right? But then I saw this karate demonstration, and they line up, and all of a sudden I see the guy's on the floor. I go, what was that? I said, that's for me. I said, no more of this getting thrown around like a sack of potatoes. So, I went and joined Kai Tsumura, and he was teaching at that time at the JCC. And I didn't unfortunately get to attend classes as regularly as I should have. Because we're in a family with 3 kids. My mother's working, my father's, so whenever I could, I attended, but I was somewhat lax sometimes.
And was it the same teacher who gave that demonstration, or was that someone different?
No, it was absolutely Kaitsumura who gave the demonstration. Yes.
Yep. And then how did that journey progress? Did you get what you needed there? I mean, obviously you're still doing it, but
Well, like I said, it caught my attention, and I really loved what happened is Chito Ryu at that time, which actually all the Chito Ryu at that time in Canada was from Soroka Sensei. And Soroka Sensei had started including Shotokan katas and techniques in there, which became an issue later on in 1982, but we'll talk about that after. But the beauty of the katas also caught my attention. These fluid movements and things, and I'm going, wow, what is this stuff? So, I mean, Kion and Kumite is great, but kata sort of completes that whole picture. I mean, certainly there's people who say, well, you can't apply that in combat. Well, you'd be surprised. I've actually applied that in a street fight. And one of my main instructors at that time, later on in the 70s, I've seen him execute in Kumite techniques that people say, well, that's impossible to do. And he was doing it. So that really created this love of I've got to do this, and I'm going to keep doing it. And it took me a while when we came to Quebec to find the right school, but I did that eventually too.
So you at that point had your aha moment of this is
absolutely,
like I get to Quebec, this is what I'm doing, and this matters.
Yeah, I love the judo and jujitsu. Don't get me wrong. I still occasionally will practice some of those techniques, but it was really the karate that caught my attention, perhaps because, like I said, I was a small kid and they were throwing me around. I thought, damn it. But when I saw that demonstration and the speed of the movements, and next thing I know, the guy is down. It's like, whoa. That caught me.
It would be a fair assessment of your words for me to say, Sensei Suino, he's saying that judo and jujitsu are okay, but karate's far superior. Is that accurate?
No, that's not what I'm saying. Oh, jeez. You're twisting my words. Is this some sort of personal feud between the two of you?
Yeah. Listen, Sensei, they're self-conscious, you know, give them time.
All right, fine. I'm twisting your words. So take us to Quebec and take us to where that next phase took you. Oh, by the way, I just want to say quickly, there was a tournament at the Japanese Canadian Cultural Center recently, and I was watching the karate class being taught, and you'd be very happy to know it was excellent karate. I don't know who was teaching, but it was an incredibly good class. So what you were doing in the 60s, they're still doing there today. And could even be the same room. I don't know, but I just wanted to share that because I was sitting watching between matches and I was very impressed. So, you know, standards up there. So take us to Quebec and take us to who you found there and how it felt.
Well, oddly enough, after spending those 3 years in Toronto, then the French gets a little rusty. So my parents decided when we came back here that they'd keep sending us to English school. They thought it was a good thing to do, although the Quebec government would have, or some of the separatists would have, a different opinion of that.
Mm.
But really, at that time, I was trying to look around and find something, you know, that I could keep up my practice. I was fortunate enough that the high school I went to eventually had judo. So I practiced judo at the school and kept that up. Later on, I got the opportunity to go to Raymond Damblant's school here in Montreal and practice with those people. And that's where I did the Aiki and the Aikido. So it was a good opportunity there. And it was also a very good atmosphere. And I mean, can't go wrong when somebody's part of the Canadian Black Belt Hall of Fame as judo. So Damblant is also the equivalent, if you will, of Nakamura, and a very nice gentleman, just superb. Okay, and through that, I found out that I could go to some courses, but again, because I wanted something a little more local, I found out that the YMCA at that time in Verdun, a suburb here in Montreal, was offering some karate courses. I go, oh, yeah, okay. And that's where I got introduced to the Shotokan. So obviously, because of the Chito-ryu, having some of that Shotokan in there, I was able to blend in very quickly with that.
And how did you, so first off, as I was listening, I was just thinking about how you really did, without ever calling it that, have an early MMA experience. You were doing ground, you were doing throwing, you were doing stand-up.
Absolutely.
And were you at that time conscious that you were doing more arts than other people, or were you, when you were working one art, did you feel the benefit of another? Was that
Oh,
anything?
no, I was absolutely aware that I was doing different things. As a matter of fact, there were some people who were saying, oh, you're not going to learn anything if you're spreading yourself too thin. And there's other people who are saying, oh, no, quit that. That's no good, that stuff. So there was this sort of elitist attitude or atmosphere of some of these places that only they had the right stuff. And I wasn't of that opinion. And as far as I'm concerned, I actually wrote this. I had a blog that I set up, and I actually wrote this as one of the articles to answer one of my colleagues who said, well, you should write more. And I spoke about, to me, it's like practicing a language and having a good vocabulary. Because if you want to speak well and speak like an educated person, you want to have as many words as possible. And to me, that's what these different martial arts are. It's things to help me with my martial arts vocabulary, to help me develop my diction so I can speak well in martial arts.
Mhm. And you're now in Quebec doing Shotokan, which, became your primary art, if I'm not mistaken. So
Yes.
talk us through that expansion that provided for you and how that felt to land at home.
Well, I was lucky enough to be introduced to a gentleman by the name of Ari Anastasiadis, who was actually the original, if you will, person to introduce JK Shotokan to Canada back in the 1950s. As a matter of fact, sometimes they talk about here in North America, well, this guy was the first, this guy's the first. I'd have to argue sometimes with some of the Americans who think it was Robert Trias or somebody else, that we also had some pioneers here who started fairly early. And Ari was one of these people. By the way, Ari Anastasiadis, his best friend was George Serret, who was the father of Pascal Serret. So these people knew each other. They came from France. And they came to Quebec to help us develop the martial arts more here. Ari was trained in JK Shotokan, but he was also trained in Aikido. So I got the chance to meet him and start doing more serious Shotokan at a slightly higher level. Eventually, I ended up at a club here called Dojo Central, which is here in Montreal City, which is a JK dojo, and eventually ended up being president of that particular place. It was a non-profit, and it was recognized by the JKA. So, and part of the JK Quebec Association, which is at that time was under Okazaki. Okazaki was our sponsor, if you will. And so a lot of the stuff that I did was through the JKA Shotokan.
And if I'm not mistaken, Sensei Anastasiadis was the first non-Japanese person to get a black belt through the JK. Is that right?
I can't swear to that,
Okay.
but he was definitely one of the first, if not the very first.
Right on.
Yeah.
And then talk to us a little bit about a Sensei Okazaki. That's a name that hasn't come up for us a lot on our show.
Teruyuki Okazaki, who sadly passed away just at the beginning of this whole COVID period, was, first of all, one of the most amazing technicians in karate. His karate was so amazing and at such a high level. Oh my God. And he was actually one of the people who helped create the JK's instructor program.
Okay.
So Nakayama wanted them to create that, but they had to have somebody who was responsible for it. And Nishiyama, of course, helped. But Okazaki was probably the main driving force behind the instructor's course. And so he started that whole thing. And a lot of the people who turned out as instructors were people who were trained by Okazaki. So when he came here to North America, Philadelphia eventually, and set up his organization, which is the ISKF, International Shotokan Karate Federation, he made sure to start an instructor's program there as well. And he was very much like a father or an uncle to a lot of people. This whole COVID thing just made me so mad that I couldn't go and attend his funeral when that was the case because of this COVID period. It really pissed me off, but that's life. But yeah, I was fortunate to get to meet him on many occasions, trained the summer camp in Philadelphia down there a lot of times, and really for a lot of years was part of that organization. And that helped me to, get to the summer camps were often attended by several international instructors. So we would get to see people like Kanazawa, Oshii, Asai, etc. They would attend. So you got to be trained by various different instructors, and it was interesting to see the approach, how different it was from one person to another, and also the things they would emphasize as opposed to their colleagues.
Well, let's jump into that because it's funny. That was literally my next question. Specifically, I was going to ask about Kanazawa and your experience with Nishiyama, but the other ones as well. What were your thoughts on their karate in particular as they did it, but also their style, even as you said, of being? You know, what can you tell us about them?
Well, obviously, Kanazawa was really exceptional. It's why he became so well known, but also some of the demonstrations he did would like flabbergast people. One of the things he would do is he would have them put 10 boards, and he'd ask them, which one do you want me to break? He could focus his kime, his focus on striking. He could determine which board would break. In other words, he could leave the first three intact and break the fourth one, and the others would still be intact. That's how good his focus was.
Wow.
Which was incredible to see. Nishiyama was also a force to reckon with, but him, it was the power he could generate that was shocking. As a matter of fact, some of his American students may remember at one point, I forget which dojo it was, but they'd actually made a makiwara, and they wanted to make, you know, a really solid one because they knew he liked to test these things. And because they wanted to make a solid one, they actually had it attached to a steel plate that was bolted to a beam underneath the floor with these long pieces. So they figured, oh, that's going to, and he snapped it with one punch. One punch, he snapped. And when they went down, the bolts were completely stripped. Okay. And they figured he generated so much power that it was the equivalent of getting hit by a car, about 1,800 PSI. Okay. So he would have basically like almost gone through your body with that punch.
Yeah.
That's the kind of power we're talking about. And you want to learn from somebody like that how they generate that.
Fun fact, Sensei, I lived in Los Angeles, and in 2003, I trained with him for about 6 months
Oh,
at his dojo on
lucky.
Olympic. It was fantastic. And Hanshi Legacy and Sensei Dofan came down, and he had a little makiwara out back, and I would go work it after class, and he would come and work with me on it. And the one thing I remember very specifically, he was pretty old at the time. He was in his 80s. You know, he'd smoke a cigarette in his office while we chatted, and then he'd shuffle out. Is he would work the beginning of the technique so slow and then fire at the end. He'd start everything this and then bang at the end, and it was all the torque off the other arm. So I mean, I didn't spend enough time with him to say for sure, but that was his primary focus every single class was that tension release. And who knows, maybe that's where he found it.
Quite possibly. Yeah. And again, it's teaching you to do the focus at the last fraction of a second.
Mm-hmm. Sensei Dofan, I want to throw it to you because I think you've got a great thought for cracking this open a little.
Yeah, I just wonder if, and I'd like to go around the horn with everybody on this one, is, you know, just thoughts on generating power. So, and people that we've seen that can generate tremendous amounts of power and how they do it. And maybe why that is, because, you know, using your hips, obviously for me, using your hips, staying relaxed. But then there are some people who have like even extraordinarily more amounts of power. So one for me, I never saw Benny Allen, but it's Sensei Legacy. We were just at a seminar 2 weeks ago, and you know, he threw one reverse punch and like 62 people in the room were like, right? So I guess I'd like to go around the horn a little bit, and maybe we'll start with you, Sensei Legacy, on, you know, how do you generate your power? What are your thoughts are on that? And how do you teach other students to do it? Like, how do you teach them to do that thing?
Wow. You don't come across something like that in 2 weeks. It's about learning summation of joint forces, how to be relaxed, have your mind in a certain way, and a lot of practice so that your timing is good. And it's really hard. It's just like training and having a good sensei who can give you all the different levels and aspects of delivering power. You need to accelerate. That means that your body has to summate properly. The rest of you has to be calm. It's sort of like cracking a whip. You know, a whip, it's effortless because when it comes out the end, and it runs down in that way. So, like Sensei Dupre said, your muscles contract. They actually get shorter when you clench your fist. So you can't make a fist. You have to form your hand like a fist and fire it with your hips. So there's a lot of different things that I probably wouldn't even have time to talk about right now. Just practice. Just it's like I tell all my students, and all the people on this call can verify this. I say to my students, in order for you to get a good punch, you have to fire at least 1 million punches. And then I ask them, so what is it that you think you should do right now? And most of them say, start punching.
Mm.
Right? Because you're gonna have to go through it. It's not something that you can do without practice. And I'm still working on it.
Thanks, Sensei. Sensei Suino, I know, actually, I would say that as I've watched your karate over the last 10 years, you've relaxed a lot. Your focus and power has gotten a lot better. So you can talk about karate if you want, but I hear you often say similar things about judo and throwing in particular, and being relaxed and generating power. What do you want to say about generating power in a different martial art, or karate if you want to go in that direction?
Well, I'm gonna cede the karate territory to Hanshi Legacy because I'm I'm a small fish in that pond. In judo, I would describe it very much like Hanshi Legacy described it. To create great power in a throw, let's think about a forward throw. You have to arrange your skeleton properly so that it can transmit energy from the floor through your hips, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not, it's not like a wide weightlifting stance and tightness in your arms and chest, and then, certainly that can throw somebody, but that's not fast, it's not efficient, and it doesn't provide you the ability to move into something else well. If you look at for my money, the sort of 135 to 175 pound class of judo players. If you look at the modern sport judo players and how fast they move and how strong they are doing something very efficient. They're relaxed, they're moving well, and they're getting their body into really good positions to drive force. And one of the piece of that is that they're willing to make the commitment. In other words, they don't mind falling down to get something done. And a lot of people would say, oh, well, classical judo is standing up. But the truth is, two 1%ers in the same floor, you're not going to be able to stand like Professor Kano did and throw people like he did in the old black and white films. You're going to have to be as dynamic as the guys are. So yeah, summation of joint forces, relaxation, correct breathing, timing, it's physics in action.
Amazing. Thanks, Sensei. Hey, Ben, you often don't answer the questions in depth, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. You've been in martial arts for over 30 years, and then I'll provide one or two things before we go back to Sensei Dupre for this. So what are your thoughts on this, Sean?
My thoughts, I've never considered myself to have big power. I mean, I'm not trying to negate. I have knocked people out and made them take a knee and all that. So, for me, it always is a function of relaxation and speed. It's never been the punch I thought that was going to land and hurt somebody that did. it's almost like hitting a baseball home run. It's like, wait, that was the home run? That was the one that just came through and the ball just bounced off. Like, that can't be it. Same with a golf swing. And so when I reflect on the punches that have landed and made people grunt without me even trying, it's always that absolute just relaxation. Hip thought, they're looking up at me. And I don't want to say that that's happened too many times, but when it's happened, it's always been speed. And also, Sensei, timing, right? Like the power on a bag is different than the power on someone who is extended and relaxed. So I'm talking a little bit more about fighting now, but them coming in a certain way aids my power because I really don't think I have ginormous power. I've always named myself as more of a Max Holloway type of touch more as opposed to singular. In any case, relaxation and speed is what I'd land on.
I won't. Sensei Copeland chimed in here. He said speed comes from being relaxed and creating that small circle feeling. And that's actually one of the things I was going to say is that you should, to develop that, in my opinion, you should start by really gross motor movements with your hips, like crack your hips big and be relaxed. And then eventually you can start to tighten that up to a thing that's like so small and it happens so fast, but you're relaxed. And the other thought I would drop in is you must think about pulling the technique back out as fast as you threw it in. Like, of course you need to hit, but you see a lot of people who use their hip and throw a technique out and then it never comes back. And then that becomes like just a kind of a thrust or a push. That would be my thought. Sensei Dupre, as we're talking about all this stuff,
Well,
feel free
I'm
to
reminded
disagree.
of something.
Yeah, feel free to disagree with any of it if you think.
No, I'm actually reminded of something. Mas Oyama from Kyokushin used to say he enjoys more training people who have a good sense of rhythm. So he used to actually play music and tell them, dance, I want to see how you move. And that struck me because, yeah, that's really having that sort of like, that you can sense the rhythm of your opponent, but you also can create your own rhythm, or you can interrupt your opponent's rhythm and throw them off. And that's all of that comes into play. Body alignment, what you're talking about, using very expressive and big moves. But sometimes you can, as you experience and get a lot of the work in and practice, you don't have to make as big a move, okay, or use the hips as much to make the same sort of impact because you've compressed it down. And that's another thing is that in Shotokan, for example, in certain positions, we're doing compression like a spring so that when we explode or let the spring go, there's a lot of power and speed there. Very, very important.
Yeah, Sensei Dupre, one of the things that I notice when I watch people use their hips, especially beginners, is they kind of telegraph sometimes when they're learning how to do it. And what I mean by that is they bring their hip back and then bring it forward and then bring it back again, instead of just send the hip forward and back, send the hip forward and back. Because I say when you pull your hip back, that's very similar to, I'm going to pull my hand back to hit you. No, just send it forward. It all goes forward.
Well, this is my second time mentioning Ali tonight, but that's his phantom punch, right? That people thought his opponent took a dive, but when you watch that in slow-mo, that's just bang, and it's beautiful. Sensei Dupre, let's get back to you. So we're talking about you tonight, but you did mention Soroka going from Chito Ryu, adding Shotokan, that leading to a change in 1982, and that's something that hasn't come up on our show. So you touch on that, or you don't want to.
I was actually practicing both Chito Ryu and Shotokan at a certain period. And what happened is that Dr. Chitose came here to Canada with his son. I believe this is 1982. I could be mistaken about the date, and when he found out that a lot of the people were using Shotokan stuff, he said, no, absolutely not. That is not Chito Ryu. And so they started being very severe and very strict about strictly having Chitoryu katas as opposed to Shotokan, and only Chitoryu katas. As a matter of fact, my colleague Jean-Noël Blanchette could probably talk about that a little bit more. Jean-Noël and I met during that period, and he could probably talk about it from an insider's point of view as opposed to my being more of an outsider. But he brought his son along also because they were passing the torch. His son was becoming the new leader of the Chitoryu. So that was a very important period. But again, for me, it was like, okay, well, I got to make a choice here. If they're going to start going with these katas, and I'm going to have to pick one. So I picked Shotokan.
Mm-hmm.
And I went with the JK. And that was pretty much that sort of decision was necessary.
So help some people out who are watching who aren't as specific with karate. What did you find to be the significant differences in Chitoryu and Shotokan?
Well, of course, Chitoryu, you're talking about, okay, I have to learn a whole bunch of new katas. Wait a second. So that was one. Two, there wasn't a lot of, how can I put this? I found it wasn't as technical and detailed here in Quebec, in Montreal in particular, as the Shotokan was.
Mm.
Maybe that's because of the training, maybe that's the instruction they received or whatever. But there was a lot more detail and attention to detail in the Shotokan, which I thought was going to be to my advantage. And this is not a reflection on Chitoryu or the style or the creators or whatever. It's just that obviously you have different levels of instruction, different kinds of instruction. But at that time, for me, I just preferred that. I found it was more of a home for me, and I didn't have to learn these new katas either. So it was like, okay, I find this more natural. And to me, I love the Kian, I love the Kumite, but the kata was a special attraction because the Shotokan katas had a certain beauty to them. They were really beautiful as far as the execution, if they're well done. Obviously, not so if they're badly done. But when you saw people like Okazaki or Tanaka or Kanazawa or any of these people, or Osaka, my God, he did beautiful katas, and he was recognized for that, and that's why he's in some of the karate books with Nakayama created, is because he was one of the people who had really beautiful katas. He executed well. Not that his colleagues or his seniors didn't, but he just was in particular, katas was really one of the things he excelled at.
So I want to talk about your competition history, but before we do, because of your love of kata, we're all curious what you did from your kata to win a fight in the street.
Oh, well, actually, it was a simple back fist. A simple back fist and an elbow. And I was actually fighting 5 people, which I didn't realize at the time because they were all in a car. And then they started piling out. And that's because they almost ran an elderly couple off the road by bypassing them in a turn that they weren't supposed to be. It was a single lane. So they almost ran this older couple off the road. And we got to a stop, and I'm like making signs like, what the hell? And one of them rolls down the window and spits on my car. So I was like, oh, okay. I'm not proud. But so ended up in a fight like that.
Right on. I'm glad the kata worked for you that day.
That was in my 50s, by the way.
Let's back up. Let's back up to before your 50s. You know, we have it listed as sort of 72 through 89, a 17-year competition span. Talk about what you were competing in, what it felt like. your perspective on competition and where its value lies, wherever you want to go with that.
Okay. Well, first of all, I think we can basically say, and perhaps Suino Sensei will have something to say, but whether it's judo or karate or one of these things, there's a value to competition because you're measuring the type of techniques that you have and the quality of the training you've received, and whether it can be effective, and whether you have the, I guess the word would be cojones, to really get in there and do what you need to do. Because initially some people have a lot of fear when you say, well, we're going to have contact, or we're going to just do it so it's like just an inch from your face, right? And they're going, whoa, wait a second. So you gotta own up, you gotta man up to that sort of thing. And for me, it wasn't about getting trophies or stuff like that. It was about really being able to judge, okay, where am I in my training? How do I compare? Can I hold up my end if I'm going to these things? And to be honest, I was not the greatest competitor. I wasn't the worst either, but it helped me at that point say, okay, I need to work on this. I need to train that, and be able to say, okay, where am I relatively in my development?
And how did it go for you? I mean, you might not want to brag, or maybe it genuinely didn't go well in terms of trophies, but 17 years is a long time to actively be competing if it's not at least going somewhat well.
Well, yes, I did. I did win trophies. I did win medals and that sort of stuff. But like I said, that wasn't the goal. Actually, I think I only kept one trophy and one medal out of all the ones that I received. I threw all the others out. Just like it was just taking up space and too much dusting. Okay.
So which one did you keep and why?
I kept one from 1982. It had a sentimental value for me because, number one of the people I trained with at that time told me that I surprised the hell out of him when I was competing because he didn't know I had that in me. And so because of that, it always reminds me of that particular comment. And also the particular year when I was part of the JKA club, the Dojo Central, as we mentioned earlier. And the medal, well, just I had to pick one of the medals, so it's just like, oh, okay, there's one.
Right on. We've talked about this a bit on the show, so we're not going to go around the horn, but what are your thoughts on fighting back in the day, either tournament or in clubs and free sparring versus today?
I'm sure Hanshi Legacy could tell you very much that. Number one, back in the 60s and the 70s, it was often rough. You didn't get the protective equipment out there on a regular basis until later on, and contact was seen like, unless it was really excessive. I mean, even sometimes they knocked the guy out and it's like, no, it was a clean hit. So it wasn't a big deal. And I think a lot of people these days would be surprised at the degree of violence that was then. Also, because I also trained, because we were mentioning different styles, with some of the people from Kyokushin, and that's absolutely contact. That's how they determine. It's like it's contact fighting. So they didn't hold back. It was contact. So you had to be rough and ready, and you don't want to get hit. You better be quick. So yeah.
Now, do you think they're like, people don't fight quite that hard, quite that often? It still happens, of course, but Hanshi Legacy often talks about how we're becoming better as athletes, better as martial artists, just through the sheer fact, if you put the top hockey player today against 50 years ago, they would just skate rings around everyone. So what do you think attributes to the fact that we are getting better, but we're not doing all that? So what was lost, what was gained?
I think one, there was still this macho attitude, because up until a point, they didn't really have women in the competitions until later. So there was still this macho attitude about it's all about being a man. And because of that, it was physicality, yes. It was muscularity, yes. And to a certain point, I found it detrimental because sometimes it turned almost into wrestling matches rather than real karate.
Mm.
And also here today, the training is very, very different from what we received in those days. And there's people now who make a study. I can mention one fellow who's named Gabriel Silla, who's actually got, I believe, either a master's or a PhD in this stuff, learning how to train people properly. So there's really a great deal of advancement that's done there, as far as I'm concerned. And the speed today, the average speed when you go to the World Karate Federation, for example, and you see the speed of some of these athletes, yeah, they would have blown the doors off a lot of people back in those days. Because again, it was more about being and not as much emphasis on being mobile. Sometimes you'd have two guys, they just look at each other and start wailing away at each other, like a heavyweight boxing match almost. And you go, that's not karate, but that's the way some of the things went. And I can say from a lot of the competitions I went to, also there was a matter of judges, finding judges who had been trained as judges or referees.
So that brings up a thought for me, Sensei Dauphin, something you and I talked about. So I just want to do a single throw to you about the idea of like maybe ego or even that intense physicality getting in the way of learning. Like it creates a limit. What do you think about that, Sensei Dauphin?
Definitely was guilty of it at certain times in my life, right? Always wanting to dominate and win. Know my place though, right? Like you stand on the floor in front of some people. I guess that's as you're asking me that question, having other people will help you with that, right? Like, so having a person like Sensei Legacy in your life, and you want to be tough and you want to dominate all these situations, and then you step on the floor with a person like that, it just forces you to put your ego in check. That thing that I say, Sean, martial arts is made up of people who have been humbled or soon will be.
Right.
Like that's just the way it is, right? So you can have a big ego. It will get in the way of you learning. The sooner you can put it aside, the better you're going to be, because you're going to be more open to learning. That ego, I think, just stops you from being an empty cup, which you need to be to learn how to do these things. I also think that you got to be willing to take your lumps. Sensei Dupre talked about it. And I think if you got a big ego, you're not going to take your lumps. Whereas if you put your ego in your back pocket, you're going to put yourself in situations where you're not going to win, and you're going to learn, and you're going to take your lumps.
Right. Sensei Dupre, I think for a sec you thought I was asking you and you had something you wanted to say. I'd love to hear it.
Well, he was talking just now about having the lumps in the ego, but there's two things I want to say. Number one, the ego is our worst enemy, especially in something like the martial arts. Because if all you're doing is all about ego, you're going to miss so many opportunities, but you're also going to chase people off because they think you're just having an ego trip, and they don't want to learn from somebody who's just tripping with his own ego and I'm the greatest, I'm this, I'm that. I think that's a deadly enemy of the martial arts, is people in this field who let their ego get in the way. I'm not naming names. The list would be too long, but yeah, it's always been an enemy of this, an enemy of learning. I mean, you could say that if the guy's ego is so big that he would only have competitions in his own dojo, and of course he beats up everybody here and thinks he's the greatest, but the minute he gets to some other open place, I mean, really, you might get whipped by the first guy who comes along. So it's a very deadly enemy as far as I'm concerned about. You think you're the best. Look, there's always somebody out there who's better. Always, always. And all you can do is learn from them, not avoid them, learn from them.
Love that. Well, we're about to learn from you because it is time for your 10 questions. Sensei Dupre
Okay.
has got the timer. You got 10 minutes. And
Okay.
what we ask is that you answer as impulsively as you can, but then expand on your answer as you wish.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. What is the most effective move in your martial arts arsenal?
Sidekick.
Who is the most influential martial artist in your life?
I'd say Okazaki for sure.
Who do you think is the most influential martial artist of all time and why?
Well, there'd be a lot of argument for Bruce Lee because he popularized it so much, but I'd also put Chuck Norris, who made a lot of movies and got people interested in martial arts, also in that way.
What excites you most about the next 5 years of your training?
What excites me the most? Learning more, learning stuff I haven't learned yet.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you get there?
We have your reservation this way.
You touched on it a little bit. Do you have a favorite film or TV martial artist, even if in real life they're not great?
Jet Li and Jackie Chan.
Do you have a martial artist, living or dead, in all of recorded history you'd like to train with the most?
A lot of people would think if I was going to say this that I would say Funakoshi, and it is a Funakoshi, but it wouldn't be the father, it'd be the son, Gigo, who was actually, I believe, because when the seniors, the students of Funakoshi talk, a lot of them mention that he brought a lot of stuff to Shotokan that they hadn't had before. Much lower positions, the side kick, higher kicks, in other words, because at that time in Okinawa, they never kicked above the waist. So Gigo Funakoshi.
If everyone in the world could have the greatest benefit you've gotten from martial arts, whether they train or not, what benefit would they be getting?
Self-confidence. Definitely self-confidence.
I'm going to tell you this. You're answering very quickly, so I'm going to sneak in an 11th question. If none of the arts you've ever practiced existed, what art would you want to practice the most?
Well, if none of those existed, capoeira.
Nice.
Brazil, yes.
Love that. And our last two questions come as a pair. What is your greatest achievement and what is your greatest regret?
Greatest regret? Not having had more opportunities to meet more instructors. The greatest achievement? Yet to be. It's yet to be.
Love that. Greatest regret was not enough instructors or not having met more. I think that is a record for wonderfully concise 10 questions. Sensei Dupre?
4 minutes.
4 minutes.
What?
You got 6 minutes to go. But you know what? There's way more things I want to talk to you about. And I actually want to talk to you about the shift towards these three arts that you're currently practicing that are softer, more Chinese. And I know we opened with that, but let's talk about what the transition was and why those are the ones you're practicing now. And I've never heard of water boxing, so you got to break that one open a little more for me.
Okay, well, water boxing is the English translation. As Randy tried to pronounce earlier, Liu Bafa, it's a combination, as I spoke of earlier, of Tai Chi, Bakua, and Xingyi. So you're the three main soft arts, if you will, and probably largely practiced by a lot of people in China, all combined into one. Um, Now, the Tai Chi was the first because, like I said, when I discovered that Kanazawa, well, no, I shouldn't say Tai Chi. Actually, I actually practiced the 7-star praying mantis before I did Tai Chi. But I can't say I did extensively the mantis because when I discovered the Tai Chi, I started practicing that a little more often. And the Tai Chi was, like I said, because Kanazawa said it added to his karate by practicing Tai Chi, by relaxing and doing something more soft. And learning that flow, that you know, you're making the movements flow, not just stiff. So that flow is important. It comes back to what we were talking about, generating power, aligning your body and the foot movement, or as we say in karate, tai sabaki, learning how to move your body and your feet in a way to make an advantage for you. And at the same time, you're aligning your parts to generate the power. So that was the whole point of learning the Chinese martial arts, is learning to apply this in a different fashion.
And so, did you feel you'd hit an end of the road with Shotokan, or are you still practicing that?
Oh, no, I still practice Shotokan. I love Shotokan.
Right.
I'll do that till the day I die.
So these are supplementary, and they've opened up your Shotokan practice.
Yes, definitely, definitely. And it shows you a different way. You know, because sometimes you can develop a certain stale or plateau in the karate world, and I find that both are sort of complementary. Hanshi Legacy could probably talk about that if he's doing White Crane, is that there's a complementary sort of fashion that they sort of interlock.
Well, let's have you do that, Hanshi, because when I started, you had just been being introduced to the crane, and our style did look a little more like Shotokan, and in the early '90s. And what is your take on what he's saying?
I agree, but I might have inadvertently been looking like I was doing Shotokan, but I tried not to. The style is just slightly different. It's ground level, and you're more mobile. And what happens is we can ask Sensei Dupre if he knows any fifth dan katas, because most styles stop at fourth dan. You go to a fourth dan, and then after that there are no. So the thing about that, it's sort of like hitting people with a bow, and then at the end putting an aginata or a spear on the end of it, and learning more, but using the same basis. And Matsumura actually invented Hakutsuru Dai, a white crane kata, to go in there. And then along being handed from master to master, everybody has put a kata in there and accented and gave more meaning to the bunkai of Shorin-ryu. So that is an accent within itself. You don't have to go out, even though it's probably always going to be good to learn something else. But there's a lot more to study. It's sort of a different dimension of karate.
Thanks, Hanshi. And let's go back to you, Sensei Dupre. We'll just
if I can, I just want to
Yeah.
touch on something here, because Hanshi Legacy just mentioned something where it reminds me of something I discussed with a friend of mine, Matt Henderson, who's a Goju Ryu specialist, and the whole idea of going back to this stuff, really, whatever style, really, again, also with the Hanshi McCarthy being a friend of mine, it's like there's a certain limit of what you can do. It's a human body, and we don't have 8 arms, we don't have 8 legs. You know, so you have to line all this stuff up and learn to use it appropriately. As a matter of fact, I think I watched one episode where somebody talked about, how in karate, a lot of the practitioners end up with bad knees and bad hips, stuff like that. And again, maybe we should be learning more, and maybe we're not aligning things quite the way it should be. Right? So it's to me, again, this whole aspect of whatever art it is, there are certain things, there's certain basics that apply to all of them. And we have to keep developing.
Sensei Suino, I saw you smiling at that when he talked about not having the 8 arms, and I think I might have known what you were thinking, but what were you thinking?
Well, I don't know. What do you think I was thinking?
I think you were thinking what Hanshi talks about, that there's, only these basics, and if we all went in the woods for 10 years, we'd come out with something looking pretty similar.
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, most of the people I know, especially those who do martial arts, have 2 legs that are shaped roughly the same and 2 arms. Sometimes they don't have 2 arms, but 1 arm or 2 is kind of the normal set of numbers. And so you got our hips that transmit power. We got our torsos, and we have our 5 senses. Yeah, so martial arts are going to look kind of the same, and even though at first glance some of them might look very different, the esoteric moves might look very different. The power sources are similar, and that's that's just what it is. But the beauty, the fascination is in the difference. Why do the styles look the way they do, given those limitations?
Well, I love what you said early on in the show when we were chatting about the Chinese stuff, about even the fact that there are some Chinese ground arts that aren't as well known. And again, it's like every culture's got their wrestling and their joint manipulation and their punching and kicking. And I think we've sort of, it's never our intent, but I feel like we've kind of wonderfully come full circle on that idea. What do you think, Sensei Suino?
If you are a warrior culture, and every culture has been at one time or another, you're going to have all these things, right? You're going to try to fight with your arms and legs, then you're going to try to leverage it with weapons. You're going to end up on the ground. You're going to figure out ways to create pain for other people. So all these modalities are going to come up, right? It just so happens that most of us have pursued some of the Japanese ones, which have a really long history of refinement and focus at the end of a long history of evolution. So yeah, man. I don't see how it could be any other way.
Well, and there's a term
Listen,
that,
I want to throw a thought in there, Sean. Sorry. I think also geography and climate plays a part in the way a martial art evolves, in my opinion. Because the clothing that you wear, for example, don't wear. I would say in Canada, the idea of Taekwondo being developed in this country is probably pretty slim. Standing on icy spots and throwing high kicks while you have 2 arms and 2 legs, you're going to use them slightly different depending on the topography of where you evolve and grow up, I think.
I also was going to throw to you, Sensei Dofan, the idea that you often bring up of force multipliers, because Sensei Suino was talking about how every culture has these things. And I was going to include, they all have a version of projectiles, whether it's a trebuchet or a spear or archery, but everybody figures out, and again, this goes back to what Hanshi talked about very early on in this conversation, how to make a version of a bullet go quickly enough to penetrate something. And so, yeah, it is. I love what you said, Sensei Suino, that we've all happened in the Japanese direction, but that every culture has them. And we just happen to have one that goes back hundreds. And as we've been talking about since minute 1, 1,000+ years, depending on where we want to start. Where we end always, before we do our round the horn discussion of the evening, is by thanking the people who make this show happen. And, such a lovely thing. Before we rolled the camera, Sensei Dupre said, the first thing I'd want to say if you gave it to me is to thank the people behind the scenes. And that's such a thoughtful thing, Sensei, because, it's, I know you've chatted with some of the people in the crew, and I know they'll appreciate the fact that you brought that up unprompted. And for the people who might appreciate that, it's Robert Schlumsky, Justin Shea, Andrei Sedashev, Alden Adair, Josh Kitchens, Christiana Landolt, Judy Giuliani, Stavros Stavroulias, and Emily Ruth Driscoll. Thank you for making this show what it is and letting people know it exists and all the wonderful things you do behind the scenes. And now we're going to go around the horn and talk about our time together. Hanshi Legacy, what do you want to say about our chat tonight?
Yeah, it was a pleasure. it's nice to talk to someone who has more understanding or a wider understanding of some of the things that we don't know about. And you did have that knowledge. And I appreciate the fact that you came on our show and passed that on as part of our history. Are you going to Capital Conquest this year?
Well, absolutely, because it's going to be in Montreal.
Oh, is it? All right. Maybe we'll meet there.
Thanks,
Thanks.
Hanshi Legacy. Sensei Suino?
Well, any guest that comes on Punch Kick Choke Chat and talks about how they got started in martial arts through Judo and Jujitsu, it's fine by me. Love this conversation, Sensei. I don't know. I think you might be the first person to mention Gigo Funakoshi on this show, or at least so far as I can remember. A lot of cool references. You got us to start digging into Sui Chow, which is also something we don't talk about a lot on the show. I feel like there's a whole lot more depth to some of these rabbit holes, and I'm looking forward to maybe having that chat either again on this show or in person at some point.
Well, perhaps if you're all in Montreal for this next period we'll have a little bit more time to sit down and maybe share a meal, share some drinks, and talk about it.
That
I
sounds
thought you were
fun.
going to say you would have some Montreal Canadian tickets for us.
Sensei Dauphin, how do you want to say goodnight to our guest?
I really like the conversation. It was one where we didn't chip in as much, but it was nice to listen and learn a bunch of stuff, and not only learn some things, but have a lot of things reinforced. And one thing I would say, Sensei Dupre, is you and Sensei Legacy sitting alone in a room together would be a great conversation. You both have traveled such similar paths, right? So you left Montreal, you ended up in Toronto. Sensei Legacy left Rimouski, he ended up in Sarnia. You talked about John Steinberg. Sensei Legacy has this guy, Jimmy Hubbard, who is in Sarnia, like toughest guy in his neighborhood. You fought 5 guys and knocked somebody out with a back fist. He fought 5 guys and knocked somebody out with a reverse punch. It's just, you guys have like brothers from different mothers, I guess I would say. So it was really nice to hear you talk about that stuff. Also, for me, I'm a kind of a history geek, especially martial arts history. So when we started this conversation, we were all just chiming in on all this history, trade routes, and the original Chinese families in Okinawa and that stuff. I love that stuff. I just pilfered a book from Sensei Suino's library about Yabu Kensu that Thomas Friedman wrote. He wrote that book on Itosu too. I'm digging into it and it's great. So I love this stuff we talked about with the history. I also liked when you said you can't get speed until you relax. That was a good thing. But the one thing I'm going to think about is when you said power comes after you hit somebody, not before. And that's actually really true. And I've never actually really once thought about that way. And I'm going to be thinking about that a lot. I really like that idea. You know, I like you said, you threw all your trophies out. Just so you know, Sensei Legacy got a backhoe and he dug a big hole at his farm and he threw all his trophies into a hole and then buried them. He still has one too. It's like this big. It's like it looks like one of those old bowling trophies, but it's a karate guy on the top of it instead of a guy bowling. Your next 5 years, you want to keep learning. That's something we should all do. Like Sensei Suino said, Gaiko Funakoshi, like, it's funny, Gichin Funakoshi, you never see him doing Shotokan. He always looks like he's doing Shorin-ryu. He's always in an upright stance. He's always, but not his son when you see his son. So I would love to talk to him and see what the idea behind that was. Benefit, self-confidence. That's like he said the same thing. Confidence. Capoeira. I would love to do capoeira. That to me is that art that it just looks so cool. It's so athletic and it's sneaky too. Your best achievement is yet to come. Your greatest regret is not having more opportunities to meet more instructors. And I really like that you said you're going to do Shotokan until the day you die. That's in the vein of all martial artists that are true martial artists. So thank you for coming on here and sharing all your thoughts with us. And
Well, I hope
and I
Hanshin
will say-
Legacy will not think I'm a quitter.
Yeah, no, I don't think so. 61 years, not a quitter.
Not
I
a
will
quitter times two.
say that Stavros, who did the test call with you, who's part of, he said that you were such a lovely person to talk to, and you thanked him and all the people. He mentioned that to me as well. So thank you for propping up our crew, the people who actually make it happen.
Sensei, I get to chat so much during the interview that I'm not going to say much, but you know, even what Sensei Dauphin and Sensei Sweeney talked about, like that initial conversation, names came up I've never heard, and then also reinforced things that I did understand a little bit. And you just expanded my complete view of so many things tonight. And very much like Sensei Dauphin said, like I'm going to go away and I'm going to ponder a lot of this. This felt not just like a friendly conversation, but a very gentle lesson that I was ready for. And I appreciate that very much. It was a pleasure to hear you talk tonight. The last word goes to you. How do you want to say goodbye to everybody?
Well, first, thank you for having me on your show. I think, again, I have to say, I love it. I can't believe it's already over 180 episodes that you've done. My hat's off, figuratively, not literally, but and again, I think this is going to be something historic because of the people that have been on here. You know, they did. You were talking about pioneers here, so Hanshin Legacy being one of them, obviously, and the idea that you know this is recorded and it's a legacy. It's a legacy.
Well, thank you so much for that. Everybody, thank you for watching. We'll see you next week. Same bat time, same bat channel. And please, everybody, be safe until then.
Thanks, everybody. Good night,
Thank
Sensei.
you.
Everybody.
Good night, senseis.